2020 has been the first year I've been able to vote in a presidential race. I was able to vote in 2018, but since I'm a December birthday, I just barely missed the 2016 election. This year I decided to vote early at Mackey Arena. I thought about voting day of so that my vote would count on November 3rd, but for health reasons I decided to vote early, and it was a really easy process. I was in and out in 10 minutes and avoided contact with a lot of people, so I'm glad I did it that way.
Hi, my name is Ashton Katie, and I'm a first-time voter. I'm about to go vote at the Northview Church in West Lafayette, Indiana, and I'm really excited. I voted!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bipartisan Boiler Show. We have a lot in store for our viewers, but first we need to go over exactly what this is. The Bipartisan Boiler Show is a tour de force directed, produced, and created entirely by the members of Pi Sigma Alpha. The show features a plethora of our members selecting their own topics and creating panels for discussion. These topics include the 2020 Senate races, the vacancy in the Supreme Court, voter suppression, child marriage, and the Electoral College. We thought it was important to give a voice to our members in this crucial election year, and this was the perfect medium to do so. My name is Jarrett, and I'll be one of your co-hosts. I'm a third-year political science major, and I'm totally stoked for what we've created. I'll let my co-host introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Shayana, and I'll be your co-host. I am a first-year political science student, and can I just say that I am thrilled to be speaking virtually with you all tonight. There's a lot in store for you. So let's give a moment to thank Pi Sigma Alpha for all of their work that they put into this. I hope all you Boilermakers out there are watching, because tonight we are going for a train ride. Choo choo!
Woo!
Hey everybody, hey Boilermakers. Hannah and I are outside CEL 15 in the recitation building, and today we're going around campus asking students about their political views for the Bipartisan Boiler Show. Stay tuned!
No, I'm an international student.
I am registered to vote, and I already handed in my absentee ballot.
Yes.
I am registered.
Yes, I'm registered to vote.
Yes, I am. Yes. Yeah.
I have already voted, actually.
Oh, I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as long as I get my absentee ballot.
Because I feel like it's time we have new leadership in this country. We have had like a lot of events go on in this country, and this year has been such a crazy year.
I think it's a really important thing, and I really think everyone should vote, and I think everyone should voice their opinions on not who they vote for, but why voting is an important thing.
This year it's been crazy. I feel like it's so important to vote this year, and it's really our duty, because I feel like even with Black Lives Matter, like everyone's cared about that. So I think we need to actually vote to show how much we care.
I want to vote just because, all the people that we'll be voting for have some say in like all different positive things that affect us. There's a lot of different scales.
You can't voice your opinion if you don't vote. If you vote, then you get to express your opinion.
I voted by mail.
I'm gonna vote here at Purdue. I registered to vote in Tippecanoe County, so yeah.
Absentee to home.
Where are you from?
I'm from North Carolina. And yeah, so I have my ballot already. Haven't filled it out yet.
I'm going to vote local, and I'm planning on voting early. So I'm going to go over to Mackey Arena.
Absentee.
I felt like it was particularly easy.
Okay.
I just had to open up a ballot, like the ballot. I had to fill out my who I'm voting for, and then I just put in like an envelope, and then I'm done.
I thought it was super easy. To me, it's super easy to register to vote, and it didn't take too long for my ballot to come in so I can actually vote, and I just sent it back. It was really easy.
I only voted once before, and it was a little difficult to figure it out, but I think if you talk to people and kind of figure out the process, easy, but like figuring out on your own can be a little hard.
I think it's easy to vote uninformed because you can always just kind of go with what people are saying. But then if you really want to look at, the voting history stuff for yourself, it takes a lot more time. And oftentimes it may be on stuff that I personally don't even understand. So it takes a lot more effort than I think people give it credit for.
As an American citizen, I think it's pretty easy for me to vote. As a registered voter, it's been a pretty easy process. You just have to look up online, where and when to vote, and you just kind of show up.
I feel like it's kind of hard just because there's a lot of different news sources that are kind of biased, that are like the mainstream ones that a lot of people go to. I would also agree with that.
Or
Yes.
Well, my parents actually helped me too, but I also thought it was super neat that there were people with tables around, like saying like, "Hey, are you registered to vote?" and something like that. Like, I just think it's really like beneficial for those people to do that, to help people to register to vote.
I personally did it on my own, but I think like people outside like yelling at people to vote kind of pushed me to do it more.
I honestly don't really know because I don't really know other political parties that would be in it. I mean, like, I'm into like politics, but I'm not really quite sure what other political parties could be brought into.
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and if it were up to you, what would that look like?
The independent party, it's like no one cares about the independent party. So I would say I don't know what it should look like, but I think we need more opinions rather than just like left versus right.
I'd like to see more viewpoints. I don't know how increasing the number of political parties might go with like the actual voting procedure and then like how people actually elect their candidates. I don't know about that.
I would say yes, just because the two parties, like their views are so different now that I feel like a lot of people are either kind of like moderate or not as like drastic to the like one side. So I feel like it'd be nice to see more like moderate parties.
Exactly what you said. No, I think we're very right in that there's no like middle ground there, especially with a lot of things. But like I don't know how you would like fix that.
First, we'll head to our special correspondent, Thomas Frosch. Thomas is a sophomore who did extensive research for the 2020 Senate races because he feels that the Senate races are often overlooked despite being just as consequential and closely contested as the presidential race.
Now, with Thomas for our panel is Ryan Wuttrack. Ryan is a senior who chose to be on the panel because he is deeply engaged in American politics and follows many Senate races across the country. He wants to be knowledgeable about the Senate and is very passionate about the subject. Hannah Reed, a senior, will be moderating.
Now let's start this panel off.
In 2020, the presidency isn't the only close election. There could be a very different Congress post-November 3rd, so let's take a look. Now, the House is looking like it's almost guaranteed to keep its Democratic majority, so today we're going to focus on how the Senate is looking. So here's the current makeup of the Senate. There are currently 53 Republicans, 45 Democrats, and 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats, so it's really a 53-47 distribution, majority Republican. In this election cycle, 35 seats are up. Of those 35 seats, 12 are Democrats and 23 are Republicans. So 2020 for the Republicans is about defending their majority. The Democrats would need to have a net gain of 4 seats or 3 seats in the presidency in order to form a Democratic Congress. Here's how those 35 races are looking. According to polling and models from 538, about 12 of those 35 races are looking to have viable challengers, while all other seats have a greater than 80% chance of staying with their incumbent party. Of the 12 seats, 10 are Republicans and 2 are Democrats. The 2 Democrats are from Michigan and Alabama. Michigan is likely to remain Democrat, while Alabama is looking pretty likely to flip red. Iowa and both of Georgia's seats are admittedly toss-ups, while Colorado and Arizona are definitely going to flip blue. North Carolina and Maine are looking like they're pretty likely to flip blue, while Montana, Kansas, South Carolina, and Alaska will probably stay red. Now let's do some math. With the recent flip in polling in Montana, it's looking like the Democrats will definitely lose 1 seat, definitely gain 2, probably gain another 2, and maybe gain some of those toss-up states. So in total, between 2 to 6 seats. So the Democrats could end up having somewhere from 48 to 53 seats. So to the question of whether there will be a Democratic majority in the Senate after November 3rd, it depends on things like the effects of the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, how constituents are feeling about COVID relief, and just the national partisan winds, which are looking to swing a little blue this time around. But admittedly, this is all speculation, and stranger things have happened in America. So I guess we'll see after election night.
For this panel, we're going to be discussing the Senate race, specifically in Colorado. For the first 3 minutes or so of this panel will consist of a discussion around the three central issues that have affected the Colorado Senate race: the COVID-19 pandemic, the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, and the environment. You may begin.
I think the SCOTUS nomination is very emblematic of issues that incumbent Senator Cory Gardner has faced throughout his campaign, and that he has tried to distance himself from the National Republican Party. But now this nomination of Judge Barrett is, and his agreeal to vote on her nomination when she is voted upon in the Senate, is tying him closer to the National Republican Party that he's been trying to get away from.
Yeah, I mean, particularly with the SCOTUS vote, I mean, this is a unified party effort. There were questions about it earlier. Senators were like, "Ooh, is somebody going to defect right from this vote?" But it's very much everybody, the whole party is behind this, and it is very much a Republican move more than anything. And so Cory Gardner's being part of that is something that does link him to the Republican Party and Donald Trump, because this is, of course, Donald Trump's nominee. So he can't really escape these kinds of things, even though he spends so much time trying to say that he's so bipartisan and so moderate in these kinds of things.
Yeah, Donald Trump's stance on COVID is another example of this, where Trump has been criticized and he has negative approval ratings over his handling of COVID. And Cory Gardner, by association, is connected to that underwater approval rating. So despite what Cory Gardner, try to do on his own, he can't escape voters' perceptions that he is just a lackey of Donald Trump.
That's certainly been a criticism of John Hickenlooper's. He would repeatedly say in the last debate that why didn't you try to convince Donald Trump to put through, or Mitch McConnell try to convince either of them to put through more stimulus. And that's certainly something that has been a central point of John Hickenlooper's criticism of Cory Gardner. And that's been similar in a lot of these other seats, Senate seats that are up in 2020. With a lot of these kind of moderate Republicans trying to just distance themselves from the national scene and really from the party as a whole, as it seems that the states are either going more blue or going more unaffiliated. This has been something that is really a bit of a turnoff to voters, it seems, is the fighting between the two parties and the view that the party is the only unit that matters, and that these individual senators or representatives or any of them are able to operate of their own will and not just be puppets of their greater party. Go ahead.
Yeah, when Senator
time, can we make sure we address the environment?
When Senator Gardner has tried to tout his individual compliments, he loves to repeat the Great American Outdoors Act, the Great American Outdoors Act, because Coloradans, they care about the environment. And Cory Gardner, he touts this one thing he accomplished, but meanwhile, the state is burning with its largest wildfire in history. Yet only very recently has Senate Republicans agreed to natural disaster relief funds for both Colorado and California experiencing heavy wildfires. So even when Gardner has tried to be independent from the party, he still gets wrapped up into the fights in DC that he promised he would be a different Republican from.
Awesome, thank you guys. All right, well, we're going to move on to conclusions. So you will have a minute each. Thomas, you may go first.
Sure. So in thinking about what the kind of what has been the main influencing piece in terms of what the rhetoric is for a lot of these campaigns, for a lot of these more contentious seats where there's a possible chance that they'll flip, has been this trying to dissociate from the larger Republican Party, and there's also been a bit of that with the Democratic challengers as well. They're trying really hard to kind of center their focus on the issues of their own individual state, and thus trying to remove themselves from these larger, more partisan battles, to make it look like they're their own independent agents who are just working on behalf of their constituents in their home state. And so that's where those two aspects align, is with I think there's maybe this perception that it's party or state, and it's one of those two things, right? So you're either towing the line of your party or you're working for the state, and you can't be both at the same time. So that's what it seems like these moderate Republicans are trying to do, is say that they're more for the state. And the Democrats, it's a bit more wishy-washy with their campaign rhetoric and trying to make comparisons from state to state. But that seems to be about the trade-off that we're trying, or at least the message that we're trying to get at, that Republican candidates or incumbents are trying to get across.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Ryan, you may go for your minute.
And I think that despite the best efforts of both Republican incumbents and Democratic challengers, that the nationalization of the race in 2020 has prevented these local messages from getting through. Donald Trump is just too powerful of a political force to be ignored. And so I think you see in Arizona and Maine, along with Colorado, of Republican incumbents who are really struggling because of this phenomenon. And you'll see Democratic challengers in North Carolina and South Carolina, and two races in Georgia are benefiting from this nationalization, and that they're getting more resources to benefit their campaigns in states that would be very surprising for Democrats to win even 4 years ago. So this nationalization has made it so that the Senate is just another extension of the presidential race versus being a state by state basis.
Well, that is all the time we have. Thank you, Thomas and Brian, for joining us for this panel today.
Wow, what a great discussion. I wonder what other topics are in store for us today.
Well, Jared, I heard a little secret. You want to hear it?
Duh.
Well, rumor has it there's a basketball court on the roof of the Supreme Court building. I heard it's the highest court in the land. What do you think about that?
I guess there's a lot of hearsay with the higher ups. Although, Shy, I'm sure you set the bar pretty high with that Supreme joke.
Well, I think you've caught me. Seems like I can't bail my way out of this one. As a sidebar, our next moderator for the SCOTUS panel is Amanda Shy, a third-year student at Purdue. Jarrett, what do you say we put our jokes on hold and appeal to Amanda's wise words?
No objections here. Our next topic will be on the Supreme Court vacancy. The panelists for this topic are Ishita Khurana, Arwa Iqbal, and Abigail Mullins. Ishita is a junior and chose this topic because the loss of RBG and the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett is sure to raise a lot of questions. Arwa is a sophomore and chose to participate in the SCOTUS talk because of RBG's legacy means so much to her. Abigail is a sophomore who joined the panel because RBG was a monumental figure for gender equality, and she thinks it is important for people to understand her legacy in the Supreme Court.
I can't wait to have a case of smartness after this panel.
Thank you. So my name is Amanda. I will be moderating our student-led panel discussing RBG's recent passing, as well as the recent confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court and what exactly this means.
I think the president should not replace the SCOTUS seat before the election.
I have no opinion, really.
I think you should just pick a good judge.
Based on how close we are to the election, I think it feels very rushed. I would love to see it wait until the next president is in, whether it's Trump or not?
I think it should wait until after the election just because it is so close to that time and then the change if there's any. I personally feel like, it is the president's job to nominate a Supreme Court justice. And so, since he will be in the office even after the election until January, it is still his job to do that.
To introduce all of our fine student panelists, above me is Ashita, to the right of me is Arwa, and in the top right corner is Abigail. To start off our discussion, we will go back to the first historical event, which is RBG's passing. Arwa, can you talk a little bit about what RBG's passing exactly meant and what she meant to so many people?
Yeah, I think the death of Justice RBG was definitely something, that was historic because she was an icon to many, and she was the legend of so many movements working with the ACLU and various other organizations. I think one case that always will, stick out to me is US v. Virginia, in which she advocated for the rights of women to be in university, which I think, without that, would we even be here is the question. Another case I think is very important is Alsmed and LCC, which basically advocated for the rights of people with disabilities to basically be a functioning member of society. And I think, that really shows who she was as a person, as she wasn't only concerned about women and just, the idea of equality, but she was concerned about equality for all. And I think it's definitely a shame to lose someone uh, that had this much impact, and the idea of, with a new justice, we could potentially have all those rights, just taken away from us, depending on how cases go.
Thank you, Arwa. Speaking of the decisions that are at stake with this recent confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, we will turn it over to Ashita to exactly discuss what that confirmation means.
There are cases to be heard and potentially overturned as early as November. There's already a date for the Affordable Care Act, so that Amy Coney Barrett's going to hear that one November 10th. And people aren't sure how the ruling will go, but if it is repealed and killed, it's going to leave about 20 million Americans uninsured in the middle of a pandemic. Another case that is said to be heard in sometime in November is the LGBTQ rights. So Fulton versus City of Philadelphia is the specific one that's going to be heard, and that case is based on if religious foster agencies are allowed to bar gay prospective parents. That one is most likely to be overturned given Amy Coney Barrett's stance on LGBTQ rights and how she feels about that. Something else we can see in the near future is reproductive rights, but also it's not just about abortion, it's also about a lot of closure of clinics. And something else is immigration rights. So recently over the summer, Trump had sent DACA to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court ruled against him. So DACA was not overturned, but with her confirmation, he has another person on the court that would rule on his side. So we could see DACA again being fought and potentially overturned.
Yeah, so it makes it very clear that millions of Americans really are at stake with the Supreme Court decision, which explains a little bit why it was so controversial and why so many people were speaking out against this. The last time we saw a Supreme Court vacancy filled in an election year was back in 2016 with the passing of Justice Scalia in February. Obama, then president, waited a month to nominate Merrick Garland in March. And even still, the Republicans in Senate and Congress refused to allow him to be confirmed to the Supreme Court, despite being 8 months before Election Day. Whereas in this case, we saw the same night that RBG passed that McConnell had decided to fill the Supreme Court vacancy. So can you explain a little bit how this is a damage to American faith in the Supreme Court and exactly how this was controversial?
So Mitch McConnell did block the confirmation of Merrick Garland during Obama's presidency. And that's why it's an act of hypocrisy to see him now rush through the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. And as she was replacing Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who fought for so long to be a part of the court, and became the second woman on the Supreme Court. That's what makes it kind of even a harsher burn in this case. Justice Amy Coney Barrett does represent this more ultra conservative bloc of kind of legislation and judicial branch in general, as she represents kind of Scalia's view of originalism and kind of taking the Constitution for what it is and only what it is when it comes to the law and interpreting the law. And this can ultimately, as this changes the spectrum of the court, as there are now 6 conservative justices on the court and only 3 who lean to the left.
Is it also a concern of a lot of people, the fact that Trump has been considered to be court packing, where he has also extended this kind of strategy to fill as many vacancies as possible in the lower courts as well?
So under the Obama administration, the Senate did block all like the vacancies of him to fill the vacancies in appellate courts. So President Trump has had a lot of opportunity to kind of fill those seats. And when he has filled those seats, they kind of represent this, similar to Amy Coney Barrett, this ultra conservative bloc.
What could potentially Democrats do, and what has been discussed to make up for the fact that the current balance of the court is leaning towards conservatives?
So there has been a discussion of court packing, which seems kind of unrealistic as this really has not been done in a long time. It was threatened under FDR when they were blocking his kind of New Deal package. And it was threatened that he would expand the court, but this did not happen. And if whoever becomes president were to continue to pack the court and add more justices, there's nothing really stopping future presidents from also packing the court in this way. And so this also could make Americans lose faith in the Supreme Court, as there are so many people on the Supreme Court if this continues to happen. And so other ways that have been discussed to kind of solve this issue of these conservative justices is to add term limits to justices, which was like 18 years was proposed. But the Constitution is super ambiguous about kind of the role of the judicial branch in general. And so this is unlikely to be passed.
So I think that kind of concludes our structured discussion. I would now like to open it up to any sort of opinions or personal feedback you guys have about the process that you see so far.
So Justice Amy Coney Barrett, if she is on her seat, as long as late Justice Ginsburg was, she's gonna stay until about 2059. But however, there are 3 more senior justices on the court, and if my calculations are correct, then we're going to need about 12 years of a Democratic president to even out the 6-3 conservative to liberal scale that we currently see on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all my correspondents. I think, with the new justice, it seems just absurd how rushed it was. A confirmation before an inauguration is simply not rational, and it's almost unfair to instill this much fear in the hearts of the American people. The idea that so many rights are at stake is simply absurd, as mentioned before. I think, America still has a lot to do in terms of progressing to where we're not here fighting for basic rights. And I think it's important to take into account that what happens now is going to have lasting consequences for all of America.
Kind of just adding on to Arwa, at this point, I don't think it matters if you're Democrat or Republican. I think the whole country's affected. If, for example, I mentioned if the Affordable Care Act is overturned, that leaves 20 million Americans uninsured, and they're not going to look at your party. They're going to see that you don't have insurance.
Quick side note, just the idea that we're in a pandemic and this is being threatened, where so many people are living paycheck to paycheck, if that, is simply insane and unfair.
Yeah, I want to thank all of the panelists for giving their very well-informed opinions and feedback and research into the topic of RBG's passing, as well as the subsequent confirmation of Justice Amy Coney Barrett. It is very easy to see after our discussion today why this has impacted so many Americans and why so many Americans have become upset and more invested in the electoral process, as well as why they feel maybe disenfranchised by the Supreme Court as it stands right now.
Hey, Shy, I got a question for you. What do you call voter manipulation in China?
I don't know.
Gerrymandering? Whew.
Oh my, that was a good one. That was a good one. Well, let's get back to the panel.
All right. Our next panel will be about voter suppression. Our specialist for this topic is Pravina Ravi, who's a senior in political science. Pravina studied this topic because she believes that this issue does not have enough visibility. Ironically, she's an international student, so she cannot technically vote. However, she's a student director at the Purdue Votes Coalition and encourages increasing student voter turnout rates.
Personally, I love to see the engagement from all students on campus. Major props to Pravina for her involvement with Pi Sigma Alpha and her dedication to encouraging voting at Purdue.
Speaking of voter suppression, I got some bad news. I heard that Stinky IU has a better voter turnout rate.
That is impossible. There's no way that we as Boilermakers would let that school beat us.
I mean, the facts are in this meme. Look at this.
I don't know whether I should laugh or cry.
How about we let Pravina do the talking and you can go cry somewhere else? Yay, let's give it up for Pravina.
This year, with the global pandemic, there have been more challenges getting people ready to vote than ever before. Voter suppression is not a new concept. Voting rights have been under attack nationwide as states pass various voter suppression laws under different guises. Ultimately, any law that leads to significant burdens for eligible voters trying to exercise their most fundamental constitutional right can be considered a form of voter suppression. So, what forms of voter suppression have affected the 2020 presidential election? There are quite a few, but I want to focus in on the ones that have affected student voters. Changing voter ID laws can be considered a form of voter suppression. This one hits close to home, as it has affected students on Purdue's campus. Tippecanoe County had traditionally accepted older Purdue IDs that did not have an expiration date since 2008, until the new county clerk raised the expiration date issue in 2018. In cases like this, short-term transitional challenges are inevitable, and how well these issues are addressed can have a big impact on voting. Polling location closures or relocation is another form of voter suppression. Last year, the Texas legislature outlawed polling places that did not stay open for the entire 12-day early voting period. The politicians that pushed for this roadblock defended their decision, saying that they are raising barriers to election fraud, not ballots. Unfortunately, several campuses across Texas felt the effects of this law. For example, Austin Community College had tapped into its own funds to set up temporary voting locations for students on 9 of its 11 campuses. In 2018, those 9 polling locations logged nearly 14,000 ballots cast by full-time students who went there. Those students now have to go out of their way to find polling locations off campus if they want to vote. The last form of voter suppression I'll mention today is purges to voter rolls. Voter purges occur when updates to registration lists are made. This process is meant to remove voters who have died, moved, or become ineligible for one reason or another. However, at times, the process can also knock off eligible voters with little notice. This is why it is so important to double-check your registration status as you're getting ready to vote. A successful democracy requires the full participation of all of its citizens. We cannot expect to achieve a true democracy when so many eligible voters are subject to voter suppression.
Our next segment involves the topic of child marriage. Our speaker, Frankie Collins, is a senior who chose this topic because, and I quote, It is not something that people think of as existing in our country when it is actually a decently large and complex problem. Jarrett, what are your thoughts about child marriage in the United States?
Actually, I did hear this joke one time. So a child bride and a
Whoa, 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 whoa. Jarrett, wrong time to make a joke, buddy.
I thought that's what I was here for, like comedic relief, something like that.
Let's just move on to the panel.
Hi, my name is Frankie Collins, and I'm reporting to you live from the United States of America. Today, we are going to be talking about child marriage laws in the U.S. Oftentimes, when people hear the term child marriage, they don't associate it with the U.S. Instead, they think of third world countries, oppressive regimes, and dictatorships. But what if I told you that child marriage is legal within 46 states? The only states to ban this practice are Pennsylvania, Minnesota, New Jersey, and Delaware. In 23 states, there is no minimum age to marry, meaning that these states have weaker child marriage laws than countries like Afghanistan and Honduras. A 2018 research study that compared marriage license data from 41 states found that over 200,000 children were granted marriage licenses between 2000 and 2015. Children as young as 12 were permitted to marry in the state of Louisiana, South Carolina, and Alaska. The state of Missouri even became known as the destination marriage site for 15-year-old child brides. Families from as far away as Florida were reported to have traveled to Missouri to obtain a child marriage license. In 87% of the child marriages that occurred during this time period, the minor involved was a girl. And in 86% of those marriages, this girl was marrying a legal adult. So in 38 states, what would have otherwise been considered felony rape was made okay, and charges were dropped because the abuser married the victim. Oftentimes, when a child engages in a civil marriage with a legal adult, that legal adult who married this child can no longer be tried for statutory rape, felony rape, child rape, or anything involving rape like that, because it's within marriage. So, parents might believe that child marriage might be a good outcome for their child, especially if their daughter ends up pregnant. But children who get married before the age of 18 are harmed for life. Aside from being 50% more likely to drop out of school, a teenager's chances of living in poverty doubles, and they are 3 times as more likely to experience abuse from their spouse. Girls between the age of 15 and 19 are also twice as likely to die in childbirth, and the newborn children of young mothers face an even greater risk of dying as well. Between 70 and 80% of these child marriages that occur in the United States are found to end in divorce. What is even more shocking is that in certain states, children cannot even file for divorce, meaning that in 46 states, children are permitted to get married, but they are not permitted to get divorced, even in cases of domestic abuse, sexual abuse, and many other reasons. So, what happens if a child is being abused in a marriage? Not much. Child protective services often don't get involved because marriage is such a gray area, and if a child runs away from home and they are caught by the police are legally obligated to return that child to their spouse, even if their spouse is abusing them. These children who are experiencing abuse can't even go to domestic abuse shelters or women's shelters because these shelters do not accept anyone under the age of 18, meaning that children who are in child marriages and are suffering abuse don't have anywhere to go. They have to wait till the age of 18 to get a divorce. In theory, the president could pass an executive order that outlaws child marriage in the United States. But seeing as child marriage has been around since the start of our nation, it is incredibly unlikely. Combined with that fact is that people don't even think of child marriage as happening in the US. So the issue doesn't get the attention that it deserves. As the study pointed out, over 200,000 children were married in the US within a 15-year period, and on average, at least 40 children are being married every single day in the US. Are state legislatures doing anything about it? Not really. Child marriage in 4 states that I listed earlier, it only became illegal in 2015. Pennsylvania and New Jersey were some of the first states to ban it. But the reaction from legislatures has been really slow because some legislators don't want children who get pregnant to have their children outside of wedlock. They would rather these children marry their rapists and abusers than have a baby born outside of wedlock. Some legislators don't even think child marriage is a problem. Not a lot of research has been done about it, so many don't even think it exists within their state, and a lot of legislatures are hesitant to intervene with issues that are seen as being in the family or within certain communities. But a lot of norms in the US are changing about marriage and the age to marry. Now, marriage is seen as something that people should consider lightly. People are getting married later in life, and they're waiting to have children later in life. Child marriage has been declining within the US since the 2000s, but it is still a prevalent issue. And on top of that, it isn't even being considered as a national topic. So there's a few organizations within the US trying to fight child marriage, like Unchained at Last and Girls Not Brides, but they face a lot of resistance. In the state of California, it's still legal to get married as a child, and California typically has a lot of laws that are more liberal than other states. So even if victims of child marriage do come forward and testify to their state legislatures to try and get laws making 18 years old the minimum age to marry, these laws often die in committee or don't pass simply because legislators don't think they're an issue or they don't want to get involved in it. So, if you're interested in child marriage and you want to work towards decreasing it in the United States, speak to your state legislature and volunteer. Get the word out about child marriage because it is still an issue and it is not going to go away unless people start talking about it. Thank you.
Heading this next panel is Mateo Ramirez. A junior has become aware of the increasingly controversial topic since the 2016 election, the Electoral College.
Also in this panel are Thomas and Ashton Katie, a sophomore, who says the Electoral College is a system that has a lot of power in our country and that she would be remiss to not discuss the pros and cons of such an essential institution. Speaking of the Electoral College, I recently saw a meme the other day and I thought it was pretty funny.
Well, I gotta see it now.
All right, here you go. I hope that meme helps ease the tensions a little bit. Now, let's give it up for our panel about the Electoral College.
Thank you, Shayana. So today we're going to be talking about the Electoral College, and first we're going to start with this little clip.
The Electoral College, those are the ones that ultimately decide. So my civics are not the best, and so that really came as a surprise to me in the previous election.
All right, today I have two experts in political science, Ashton and Thomas, and we're going to be talking about the Electoral College. And can one of you guys explain just an overall explanation of what it actually is?
Yeah, so the Electoral College is a system that the Founding Fathers thought would be the best way of choosing the US president. So basically, you think about your numbers of US senators and US House Representative members in your state. So for Indiana, there are 11, all combined of senators and House reps. And then there's also an equal number of Electoral College members in that state. So Indiana has 11 Electoral College members versus California, who has 55. So these group of people are the ones that get to choose who becomes the United States president every year.
Thank you, Ashton. And Thomas, can you a little bit explain, like, why did our founding fathers create this in the Constitution, and why did they write it in?
Sure. So the founders kind of juggled these ideas of democracy versus a republic, right? Because you have these this duel between what the majority, or sometimes referred to as the mob, would wants, and then kind of the minority will, and you're trying to kind of balance those things out. So it's not just all mob rule all the time, right? So the Electoral College is you'll notice the college part of it, right? It was supposed to be these scholars and intellectuals and basically smart people who could take cues from the states and what they wanted. And then they, the electors who take the cues from the states, are going, and they are the ones who are actually going to vote. So they are going to be the kind of buffer between the popular will, the mob will, and they're going to make the right decision. Although that has not really held up. They don't really do this purpose. They usually just go and vote exactly as the state tells them to. And for the few times that they go against their state in terms of who they voted for, those are called faithless electors. They have never swayed an election one way or another. So in truth, this buffer process just really hasn't been a factor at all.
Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a faithless elector actually goes against the popular vote in the state, some states can actually punish them with jail time.
Right. So recently in July, I think there was actually a Supreme Court ruling that said that states could punish faithless electors who go and vote against what the popular vote of their state was. So that is something that is totally in game for states to rule on. They can decide whether or not they want to punish their electors for being faithless.
Awesome. So I believe we have another clip here that we're going to watch right now.
I understand why people would say their vote doesn't matter because of the Electoral College. I understand the perspective that it should be phased out because it really makes it seem sometimes like our vote doesn't matter.
So that was very interesting to watch. My response would be that all votes do matter, but with the Electoral College, some votes matter more than others. Thomas, what's your opinion?
So yeah, I think you're right about that in terms of how imbalanced it can be, especially someone from California, right? Their vote is just not going to be worth as much per elector as their vote would be in Wyoming or something like that. So it is true that there is kind of this imbalance in terms of how much of your vote matters in terms of where you live, but your vote always does matter, though. Even if you're in a state that's totally safe, it's gonna say the same as it was the last election cycle, right? It's not one of these swing states that seems that our presidential candidates give a lot of time to. The reason why it's not a swing state is because of your vote, right? So it is still important that you go out and vote for the president, and it still matters just as much in terms of where your state's electoral votes are going to go. And if the presidential candidates aren't coming to your state, well, I suppose it's just that's one of the flaws of the Electoral College, but it's still important that you go out and make your voice heard because it's still a mechanism that you have, even if there is a bit of an imbalance.
Thank you. And Ashton, can you talk more about some of the just the overall cons and negative aspects that the Electoral College brings about?
Yeah, so as Thomas has already kind of touched on, he brought up the idea of swing states. So these are states that are kind of more leveraged in the debate on who's going to win the presidential election. So in a quote from 2016 from PBS NewsHour, they quote, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have made more than 90% of their campaign stops in just 11 so-called battleground states or swing states. Of these visits, nearly 2/3 took place in the 4 battlegrounds with the most electoral votes: Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and North Carolina. So these are states that the presidential nominees stop at more than other states, up to 90% more. And so these voters are getting more face-to-face action with these presidential nominees, which makes their votes kind of matter more, because the idea of a battleground state is that it doesn't necessarily have to be red or blue in each year. These are the ones that kind of swing back and forth, kind of like a pendulum, and they can change between who the nominee is going to be. That makes these votes very important, as Mateo was talking about, the ranking of like whose votes matter more. These swing state votes are very, very important. And if the presidential nominees do not get those swing states, then that can make them lose their entire campaign.
Thank you, Ashton. My last and final remark or question is, so what can we do, and if any, should we change this process? What is the next step?
So my personal view is that a system of proportional representation would matter more in the current climate of the US right now. So there are states like Maine and Nebraska who do a system called proportional representation instead of the winner takes all program, where in winner takes all, the whole state would go towards whatever the majority vote is for the entire state. So all the electoral college votes would go towards Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, like 2016. But in a representational system, it would be more that the percentage of voters would be split between the actual percentage of who the state citizens want.
Thomas, what about you?
So I am with Ashton on that the Electoral College should be revisited as an institution. It doesn't do its job that it was intended to do. And it seems to be giving one party a bit of a distinct advantage in the election. I will say that I am a bit wary of doing what the usual alternative proposed is in the popular vote, because that would the other criticism and one of the pros of the electoral college is that it does kind of put a bit of a thumb on the scale for the rural versus urban distributions here. So in a system that was entirely of the popular vote, all interests would basically be around what cities are interested in. And that's not just candidates visiting cities as opposed to more rural states, but in terms of the agenda setting ability for the national agenda of the presidency, that would always be focused towards urban areas. And so I think that there does need to be some kind of little push towards the rural end, but I do think the Electoral College just does a little too much, maybe.
All right, I want to thank Ashton and Thomas for their comments and their interviews today, and I'll send it right back up to Shayana.
Ha ha, they forgot to thank Jarrett.
Be quiet, dude.
Anyway, we hope all you Boilermakers out there enjoyed this show, because I sure did.
Yeah, I mean, tonight was filled with great discussions over these hot topics that the U.S. faces in this intense political climate.
I completely agree. Once again, none of this could have been done without the amazing students within the Pi Sigma Alpha organization.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this little program we've created. We especially appreciate the potential for students to be involved in Pi Sigma Alpha.
Yes, exactly. If we sparked your curiosity or gave you some heavy topics to think about, let us know. We love the discussions that students have about topics that matter.
Well, as always, boiler up,
hammer down,
and
remember, protect Purdue.